Msso. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. We'll be starting in about 4 minutes, and the session will be recorded, and the recording will be placed on the training materials page of medra.org. Hello again, everybody. This is Liz Thomas at medra.org, or Medra Msso. I'd like to welcome those who've joined us since my first announcement. We'll be recording the session. The recording will be placed on the MSSO training, Medra training page. And we'll be starting in about just now. Pat, if you're ready, I'll start the recording.
Great, thank you, Liz. And thank you all for attending the Medra 23.0 update webinar. I think this is an important opportunity for us to communicate to you on this unusual event. Hopefully this will be useful to you. Again, my name is Patrick Ravel. I'm the director of the Medra MSSO. I'll ask my colleague, Judy Harrison, to introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Judy Harrison. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of the Medra MSSO, and I'm broadcasting to you from my home office in Greenville, South Carolina, in the United States.
So with that, so not to distract during the presentation, Judy and I will close our cameras now, but we'll open them up again when we get into the question and answer section of the presentation. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about what we're going to try to do. And obviously, the pandemic has driven the regulatory authorities and industry to extremes in trying to defeat this virus. This includes obviously this unusual circumstance of us releasing an update to Measure 23.0. Our goal for this webinar is to provide the details about the release and to try to address as many questions as possible. We've heard some questions already. We'll go through some of the questions that we've heard, but we'll also give you an opportunity during this to be able to ask additional questions. I can't guarantee that we'll be able to get to all of them during this period, but I hope that some of our slides may be able to address some of the questions you might have. So with that, let me go ahead and get to our first slide. So we'll have obviously a bit of background to describe kind of where we are and how we got here, which is not a big surprise, I think, to many of the attendees. I want to talk about the scope of the update because, again, this is a bit unusual. We are trying to make this as standard as possible, but there are unusual things. Some things are updated, other things are not. So we'll try to flag those for you so that it's very clear to you what we've done. Beyond the release itself, the global transition date is an important date and one that I think is worthy of discussion during this because of the update of the Measure 23.0. So we'll talk a bit about that. I think we're very understanding of the impact this has because many of you have already been working to update the changes in 23.0. So with that in mind, we've tried to add a few things to this release that could aid in that process. So we'll be talking about that. I do want to talk about the release package details so you understand what's included, what has been updated, what has not been updated. So we'll hopefully make that very clear during the course of this presentation. As I mentioned, we've already received many questions. We will go through those questions that we've received and try to give you the answers that kind of make sense relative to those. But again, at the end, we'll be able to address other questions that come up. So with that, let me go ahead and get started. So the ICH Measure Management Committee has decided to update Measure 23.0 to include these COVID-19 related terms. Again, this is an exceptional circumstance. We follow a very regular schedule with the release of MEDRA, so releasing an update to a previous release is very unusual for us. We realize the release of a previous version may cause some confusion, but this was probably the lesser of several evil ways we could have released the update. So while not optimal, and we know the impact it has on users, we thought this was the least impact as far as updating the release. Certainly is necessary to be able to ensure that any scientific and medical information related to the COVID-19 virus can be captured, shared, and analyzed. And that's obviously what's really driving all of this, the need for MEDRA as a tool for pharmacovigilance to be updated and put in the hands of users as quickly as possible. So I'm going to get through some of the details related to release. The key date, obviously, is the 19th of April. This Sunday, we'll be releasing the English version. The MSSO will do that, and the Japanese translation, where the MSSO will make that available on the medra.org website. And certainly our Japanese colleagues in the JMO will release the Japanese version. All of that will happen on the 19th of April. The release package will include all the normal usual files. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I think that's a key to make sure that it is a complete release and all the pieces are there. Maybe not all of them updated, but all of the pieces are in place. The release will include all the terms from the original March release of 23.0 plus the new COVID-19, roughly 70 terms that have been added, as well as other revisions. Now, some of those are, say, currency changes or the addition of a new HLT or the movement of some existing terms. So you'll see that in a bit more detail, but not a huge number of total terms impacted. And we have a mechanism, I think, that we make that very clear to you that we'll show in just a few moments. Key point here is this release replaces the original Medra 23.0 release. This is not a different release. You aren't going to see two versions in the web-based browser where you can choose the March version and the April version. This is the 23.0 release. So to give you a little bit of a sense, I mentioned there's going to be a new HLT, which is called coronavirus infections, and you can see the detail of the preferred terms and lowest level terms below that. Some of those are existing terms, but many are brand new terms that have been added to Medra for this particular release. Similarly, as you might expect, we're adding a lot of investigation terms, and that's the screenshots that you can see on the left-hand side. But that's not the only places we'll be adding them. So certainly the surgical and medical procedures will have some additional terms that would include treatment, immunization, and quarantine terms. But also if you're looking for exposure terms, those will be in the injury SOC for your use. So these are the areas that we're flagging where the new terms will be housed, but we'll have another mechanism that will make it a little bit easier for you to identify where these terms are. So if we talk more about the 23.0 update, the regulatory authorities and industry users are certainly urged to upload this updated version in line with the global transition date. I'll talk a bit about that, which is still on the 4th of May. That was the original date. Certainly, it is necessary for regulatory authorities to load the new version to avoid any potential rejection of any reports that are sent in their direction. Same would be true if you have business partners or anyone that you're exchanging data with. That's why it's key that all stay with the 4th of May transition date. And that was one of the reasons that we looked to try to get the updated release out before that time, even if it shortens your ability to transition to it by a bit of time. So again, the global transition date, 4th of May, which is unchanged, which is defined by the first Monday of the second month following the release in March of 2020. We certainly understand this gives a short time to up version, and the regulators on a Medra Management Committee realize that you might have internal processes that would maybe need to be delayed and maybe would not be completed by the 4th of May, but these are internal processes that they see as can be done after that in a reasonable period of time. And they encourage other regulators to do the same. I think this could potentially impact, audits or something like that if you hadn't completed your training on the new terms related to this release by the 4th of May. At least the Medra Management Committee regulatory authorities would not have an issue with that. So another key point I want to talk about is certainly the release package. This is our standard form. So as I mentioned, everything will be included. Not everything is changed. So certainly the directory that includes essentially the data files that make up the release, that's the med ASCII directory that you see there. Those files have been updated with this new release. So encourage you to take all of those files and use those. Similarly, the sequential files, which are used to identify the differences between the 22.1 release and the now upgraded or updated 23.0. So that's a key point to understand. Everything that was included from what was available in the March release of 23.0 plus now these COVID-19 related terms are included in this release. Because of the limited time, we chose that we made a decision that we really could not update all of the documentation. So we chose the ones that we thought were absolutely necessary for you to make sense of what is provided. So we've identified there with a blue asterisk the ones that are changed. So in this case, the README file is unchanged. It really just describes the contents of the release zip file. But the detailed report is, so you will be able to see the individual change request updated. The distribution file format has been updated, but in a very minor way, which is just to list the record counts for each of the files. We thought that was important for users to be able to be aware to support validation. So you know, if I've loaded this file correctly, how many records should be loaded in that file. The introductory guide is not updated. But we did add a new document, which is this MEDRA update, which will be translated in all the other languages as well. But it's specific to this special release and provides a bit of information as well as the record counts again to make sure you understand what happened with this particular release. This is just unique to this particular update. The SMQ introductory guide is not updated, and I should make a point to say that the SMQs themselves are not updated in this release. So the implementation of the new COVID-19 terms are only in the MEDRA structure and the terms themselves. We're still working with the MEDRA Management Committee to see when those SMQs will be updated. So as a result, the SMQ spreadsheet is not changed, but the version report is. Again, we think that's an important spreadsheet to allow users to understand the differences. The what's new document is not changed, although this is significantly different. Again, that was more an issue relative to time. We just didn't have the time to be able to update that document. So important to understand what has been updated in this release and what is unchanged. So I mentioned just briefly earlier a bit about translations. So there will be updated translations available by the 3rd of May. And the word by there is very important, which I'll explain a bit more. It's the same format and file updates as English. So what was changed in English will be changed in all of the MEDRA translations. The downloads page will show, and I'll give you a screenshot of what it'll look like, the updated version of these translations. So they are posted right now, and we will leave them there until we replace them with the updated translations. And they will, again, be clearly marked so that you'll be able to fully understand which ones have been updated. We will update and post the translations as they are made available. So we are saying certainly by the 3rd of May, but you might want to check there earlier if you're looking for a specific language to see if it's available earlier. So it won't be up there on Sunday, but sometime before the 3rd of May, all of the translations will be posted. So let me show you a few things we've done on the website. This is not on the current website where we'll be posting these updates on Sunday, but we wanted to show you a bit about how you can get information from the medra.org's site. So the 23.0 update is there in that box on the upper right-hand corner. And within that box, there are 2 links. The first blue text that you see there is marked as a dedicated COVID-19 page on the medra.org website, which I'll show you in just a moment. But there you can be able to find all of the information essentially in one place, all the notifications, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. The second blue link is the downloads page. So if you want to go directly there, you can click there, or still in the upper right-hand corner of the web page. Okay, so this is the dedicated COVID-19 page. It's a bit of still a work in progress. So you see a few question marks and maybe some other dates that have not been completed. I just wanted to give you a sense of what this page will look like, but we will update it as more information is available. but it'll include all the communications in one place, so you won't have to look into the various parts of the website. So we'll post, obviously, these announcements that we've from the Metro Management Committee, the original one, the one that came out yesterday. We'll list the new terms have been added with COVID-19 as a special spreadsheet, and I'll show you a little bit about what that will look like. That was a key request from a lot of users to be able to get a list of what are these new terms. Although it's available in other files that we provide, this is a specific product that's produced for this release. The Medra 23.0 update document that I talked about a bit earlier in the release package will also be here, as well as a link to the downloads page, this presentation, and a recording of this presentation, or at least a link to this presentation, or the recording will be available from here. Again, the note you can see at the bottom there is encouraging users to continue to submit changes, COVID-19 related changes, and certainly won't be a part of the 23.0 release update, but we'd certainly like to capture others that would be a part of the next release of Metro, which would be 23.1. Another change has been made to the downloads page, so a little bit of text added directly underneath the header there to describe what's a little bit different. But as I mentioned, I've opened up the 23.0 tab there so you can see at least a subset of the release files that are there. And I just wanted to flag, and this is just an example of what I mean by updating. In this case, it shows, although this is not posted as yet, but it's just to give you a sense of what it will look like. The Medra version 23.0 update has been clearly identified there. The other languages have not been updated, so you don't see the word update following the name there. So that's what I mean by clearly flagging them. In the upper right-hand corner of this page, you'll see that there's this box that has a link in there for COVID-19 related terms. This is a spreadsheet that we've developed that will list all of the related terms, the COVID-19 related terms, and revisions in a single place. So with that, let me show you just a snippet of what that would look like. So it is a spreadsheet that if I work from left to right, and I'll talk about the text, the red text at the top in a moment, but includes the code associated with the term, the LLT, the currency, which obviously relates to the LLTs, which is the bulk of the terms that are affected. And then we provide the full hierarchy of that term from preferred term through SOC. Column H includes a identification of the type of change. So you can see there the first entry is a new HLT, but you can see many other types of things that we've done, including some movements of existing terms, or in most cases, new LLTs or new PTs. The rightmost column is an important one, and I think we realize since there is not an update to the SMQs, and there's obviously not a COVID-19 related SMQ, we wanted to provide some level of a search strategy to users such that we have flagged the terms that we think with a yes in that rightmost column that we think would be useful if you're creating a COVID-19 search. So I encourage you to review that spreadsheet if you're being pressed to produce somewhat of a search related to COVID-19. The red text is there to describe a bit more of that, so you understand what we've done to identify those terms. But we thought this would be a helpful benefit to users to be able to see, one, no terms have been added, and two, if you wanted to conduct a COVID-19 related search to identify those terms for you. It's important to realize that while we're talking a great deal now about the 23.0 update, that Medra version 23.1 continues as planned. So the 1st of June, there will be a freeze date. So my request to you before, if you have other terms that you would like to include in Medra, certainly try to get them to us before the 1st of June. On the 1st of September, the English and Japanese release will be made as normal. And then 2 weeks later, the Medra language translations will be available. And finally, the first Monday of the second month following the release, which in this case would be the 2nd November, would be the global transition date. So those dates are unchanged by this update to Medra. So again, we're following the normal release schedule. With that, let me transition to my colleague Judy, who will go through a few of the questions that were related to that we've received to date, and then we'll open it up to other questions. Judy?
Thank you, Pat. I'm just making myself presenter and switch over to presentation mode. Okay, thank you. So these are some of the questions that we've received already from users, and I see that some of these do anticipate some of the questions that we are receiving in the chat. So I'll go through these brief Q&As, and then we will open it to a general Q&A session. So please feel free to enter your questions in the chat field, and we'll try and address as many of them as we can. So I think Pat has stressed this first question, do you need to implement the updated 23.0 in your system by the transition date of 4th of May? We do recognize that this is a rather compressed time frame. Many of you might have already gone some way towards implementing the March release of 23.0. But I think the direction from the Medra Management Committee and the regulators on that committee is that users, both regulators and industry partners, are urged to do so. It's important to synchronize the releases across all Medra users, particularly important if you're exchanging data. For example, if you're submitting an ICSR or a SUSAR to a regulatory authority, they will have implemented the updated version in their system, and they will be prepared to receive these new COVID-related terms. They will recognize that they're part of the new 23.0 release. And just one point that is being made in the questions I'm receiving in the chat, this is called 23.0. It is a replacement for the March release of 23.0. Systems are set up just to take the version number as is, so it will not be changed in any way. There won't be identified as an update or 23.05 or 23.0A or B. It is 23.0. It's a replacement for the March one. So in order for all users to be synchronized, you're urged to try and make that transition date of 4th of May, particularly if you're going to be exchanging data. It's also important to note that as we transition to 23.1, that will be building on this updated version of 23.0. So at some stage before the transition to the next version of 23.1, you will need to update to this version of 23.0, because 23.1 will build on top of this one. If you stick with the older March release, you will be out of sync with all of the changes that we have made related to these COVID-19 terms. So very important to be able to update to this new version and replace the old 23.0 with this new one. I'll talk a little bit more too about change requests for 23.1. That is our normal cutoff date of the 1st of June. Now, can you still submit change requests for other COVID-19 related terms? We've had a lot of input already, as you can see, from users to populate Medra 23.0 with relevant COVID-19 terms. But as we learn more about the disease, we can anticipate many other potential change requests. So if you wish to submit change requests for COVID-19 related terms or any other terms for Medra itself, that 1st of June cutoff date applies for 23.1. Regretfully, I can anticipate that we're not going to be done with COVID-19 through the end of the year. So if you have terms that you want to submit for 24.0, which is the March release in 2021, our cutoff date is the same there as the 1st of December. What I would advise you to do is, if you are submitting change requests to us, take a look in the web-based browser or our MVAT tool, which is updated on a daily basis as soon as we accept terms for inclusion in MEDRA. Those are visible within those two tools. You switch to the supplemental view and you'll be able to see the terms in their hierarchy in real time. What we've experienced with many users submitting change requests for COVID-19 related terms is that they tend to anticipate what will be needed, which is good. But often we find that users are submitting duplicate requests for the same types of concepts. We've already had requests from other users and implemented those, and then we get another change request from another user, and unfortunately we have to reject that for a technical reason because we've already added that concept. So before you submit change requests, it's a good idea just to see in the web-based browser or the MVAT tool what has already been accepted. I would note that we have already processed a batch of terms related not necessarily to the disease itself, but an unfortunate consequence of the pandemic is problems with drug supplies. So we have added a number of supply and product availability issues due to the pandemic in 23.1. Another question that has come through is, will there be an update to the points to consider documents? That's the term selection and the data retrieval and presentation documents. Those were updated in accordance with our normal practices in March for 23.0. However, these documents tend to focus on general principles of coding and retrieval, and we don't get into specifics of particular disease areas. I think the general principles for coding and retrieval do apply. Certainly the term selection points to consider document makes a very important point of choosing the most specific term available. And I think with the availability of these new COVID-related terms, you have that specificity at your disposal. Now, Pat's talked about the existing SMQs. We currently have 107 SMQs in production. Our immediate effort was to make these COVID-19 terms available in the MEDRA files for users to be able to code. The impact on the SMQs was carefully reviewed by the medical team, and it really looks like the new COVID-19 terms that Pat showed you really only affect 2 of the existing SMQs. One for infective pneumonia. You will have seen that we have a term for COVID-19 pneumonia, and also potentially opportunistic infections. Now, COVID-19 is not a traditional opportunistic infection. However, it can be more severe in the immunocompromised population. So some of those COVID-19 related terms could potentially be added to that SMQ. So we're working with the MEDRA Management Committee to determine what would be the optimal time for adding these terms into those 2 SMQs. However, they are very broad in nature. They cover a wide variety of other pathogens. And it might be more important for you for the COVID-19 terms to have a more focused approach to your retrieval of these terms. Pat has already showed you the COVID-19 related term spreadsheet, which shows all of the new terms and related revisions in this updated 23.0 release. So you can identify all of the terms there. The red text that you saw at the top of the spreadsheet gives you an idea about how you could use these new terms in a search strategy. One easy mechanism is to use the new HLT that we have created for coronavirus infections. And that will group the relevant COVID-19 terms, as well as other coronaviruses like SARS and MERS. You're unlikely to have many reports of those hopefully those pandemics have passed. Another way to identify potential cases in your database is to use the individual PTs and LLTs that we have flagged there. You will have seen there's quite a comprehensive set of investigation terms, looking at both tests for the virus itself, the common testing that's out there, but we're also anticipating increasing uptake of the antibody testing. So we have populated a lot of LLTs with respect to those test results. Now, will there be an SMQ for COVID-19? Absolutely, that's definitely under consideration. And I'd really value your feedback on the scope of that particular SMQ. Traditionally, SMQs would look at terms for the disease itself and positive test results. But given the nature of this pandemic and its effects on other ancillary aspects around the disease, there could be potential consideration for additional topics within that SMQ. For example, would you want us to include terms for exposures, quarantines, medication supply, and availability issues? So if you'd like to put your thoughts in the chat, we will be able to record and access this chat after the webinar. If you have any thoughts about that, what the scope of an SMQ for COVID-19 should be, whether it should just be focused on identifying cases of COVID-19, or should it also include broader scope terms for the ancillary topics as well. We'd be happy to take those considerations and discuss them with the regulators and industry partners that we'll be working with to develop an SMQ for COVID-19. I can't say when that would be released, but it is obviously a priority for all of us. Now, some of you might have already received some reports for COVID-19 cases and used the existing coronavirus terms, which are very broad in scope, and recorded those in your database. Should you then recode your data with the availability of the more specific terms? It's difficult really to talk about individual regulatory practices, but I would say that the usual practices would apply. If you're performing a clinical trial over several months or years, then I think you would follow the usual practices and the recommendations that over time you would recode your data to newer versions of MEDRA to have more specificity. But again, that's an individual organization's particular decision how to do that. With regard to ICSRs or SUSARs, generally they are not recoded unless they're resubmitted with significant additional information. So I'd advise you to consult your regulatory colleagues about the most appropriate approach to recoding data. One question that's come in from the chat here, and we anticipated as well, was will there be an update to the European Medicines Agency's important medical events list? They've already released the 23.0 version. And I'm pleased to say I've been in correspondence with the Eudravigilance Expert Working Group, and they will be including certain COVID-19 terms and producing an update to their IME list. That will be coming shortly. I don't have an exact date, but it is a priority for that group. So those relevant COVID-19 terms that represent important medical events will be included on an update to that list. And that will be available on the EMA website for download. And lastly, as many of you might be aware, that we are working with SNOMED International on a mapping between SNOMED CT and MEDRA. We're currently in the stage of alpha testing, an early release of that with a number of industry and regulatory and health authority partners. And it is our intent to coordinate with SNOMED International to look at the COVID-19 terms that we have in MEDRA and the COVID-19 terms that are in SNOMED CT. There's a lot of concordance between the concepts that both terminologies have added. So we will be coordinating with SNOMED International to make sure that we map the relevant COVID-19 terms that are common to both terminologies. And we will make that available in the first production release of those maps, which are scheduled for April 2021. I think that's taken all of the questions that we've had in advance, but before we go to the open session, what I'd like to do is, am I still presenter? I've just got a couple of slides, Pat. Or if you could go to them, just the slides that are showing the regulatory information. I just want to make sure that people are aware. Okay, I'm back to the presenter. Okay, thank you. So I've collected for you here some relevant regulatory information around COVID-19. There's a wealth of information on the regulators' websites. EMA has a comprehensive set of guidelines concerning new treatments and vaccines, the conduct of clinical trials during a pandemic, the availability of medicines, again, the supply chain issues that I mentioned, and also the safety of medicines. Similarly, FDA for the United States has issued guidance on the conduct of clinical trials and also post-marketing reporting. MHRA UK also addressing the issues of conduct of clinical trials, as does Health Canada and the Japanese regulator, PMDA. There's a lot of talk around the conduct of clinical trials because the pandemic is affecting issues such as enrollment or even initiating clinical trials. The issues of informed consent, study visits. Patients may not have access to the trial sites during lockdowns. And again, the issue of medication availability, investigational drugs, and other concomitant medications that patients are taking, as well as safety reporting. So I do urge you to frequently look at these regulators' websites for the most up-to-date information. And before we go to the Q&A, I'll hand over back to Pat, but I will mention that all of the slides that we're showing will be available with the recording of this webinar on the MEDRA website on the training page. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to distribute them just prior to the webinar, but they will be available for you afterwards. And if I'll go back to Pat for the open session.
Thank you, Judy. So let me just bring up the Q&A slide. There's the first question. I think that obviously we won't be able to show all of us or go through all of the questions that we've received. We've received many of them. So I think we'll try to select ones that would be helpful and allow us within the time that we have to address them. But the first one, Judy, is what if a company has already upversioned to 23.0, but decides not to institute this new version?
Yes, that's a great question. We do recognize that many of you might have already gone far down the path in advance of the transition date to implement the March version. I would strongly suggest that you do implement the new version. I'll turn on my camera here as well. Yes, we strongly encourage you to update to this new version, preferably by the transition date or otherwise shortly afterwards. As I said, because this is a replacement for the March release, and we will be building 23.1 on top of this updated release. So if you stay with the March release and don't update to this new version, you will be then up versioning to 23.1, and you will get out of sync. You'll be missing the block of terms that we have implemented already and the structure, the new HLT, for example, is currency changes. So really, all Medra users do need to update to this version so that any incremental changes for the upcoming release will be able to transition over.
Next question. One is it's specific to FDA, but I think it's relative to all the regulators. Is there an expectation from FDA as to when this should be implemented? Can the implementation follow our company guidelines and update later than May, as in June? Is this acceptable? Will the changes carry over for the September release?
Yes, I think that's just as I was saying before, the changes that we update in this April release will be carrying over to the September release. Now, FDA will be implementing on the transition date. And again, the transition date is important if you are exchanging information. So say, for example, you had a COVID-19 term that you were using. You submit that to a regulator who has already implemented the release. They will recognize that as being a valid Medra term for the release. So it really is important, particularly if you are going to be submitting reports with these COVID-19 terms, that you should try to up version as quickly as possible so that the versions are synchronized. Now, if you hadn't up versioned, you had the March release, and you submitted a non-COVID related term, just a regular term, that would still be recognized as being part of 23.0 by the regulatory authority. The issue would come if you chose to submit a COVID-19 term. The regulator will recognize that, but if you haven't implemented it in your system, it wouldn't be recognized. So again, try to get in sync with those.
One that I think I'll address to give you a little bit of a break, which is in databases, how will the field for Medra version be shown? 23.0 or 23.0 updated? It will be 23.0. So as I mentioned, it is a replacement for, not in addition to the March release. So again, that may cause some confusion. It was the lesser of several options, a lesser evil of several options we considered. But it is a replacement for, not in addition to. Another one maybe for Judy is, will the version report essentially show the difference between the 23.0 March release and the 23.0 April release?
Yes, there are a number of ways of doing that. The version report shows all of the cumulative changes from 23.1 to this updated version of Medra. So it will include all of the changes up to the March release, as well as these new terms. Now, to get the delta for these new terms compared to the March release, that's that spreadsheet that Pat showed you. Shows all of the changes between the March release and this April release. And that spreadsheet, I see we have a question here, that will be available on our COVID-19 dedicated page on the website. So you can clearly see the delta between the March and the April release.
Will the unqualified lab test name term list be updated?
That's a great question. I think in the hurry to put this out, we had not included it, but I think that's something that we could do in fairly short order.
Here's a one that I can answer easily. So will the Japanese version be released on the 19th of April also? And the answer is yes. So that will be available on the medra.org website, as well as our Japanese colleagues will be releasing that as well. So that's a little bit of a difference than normal, because we typically would, for at least for the Msso, would release it with the other translations. But this is an unusual event. And so we thought it would be useful, if it's available, we should post it.
Okay. I see a question here. Is there a specific new term or terms for COVID-19 related pneumonia? Yes, we have COVID-19 pneumonia as a preferred term.
Is the spreadsheet shown available that was shown earlier available now, or do we have to wait until the 19th of April? There are a few questions on that one.
Yes, I understand people are keen to get their hands on it. We're just doing our final quality checks. As you see, there are a lot of moving parts here to get out the release package. It will be available on the 19th. We don't want to jump the gun. We're just performing all of our QC checks right now. So coming soon.
A little bit one that you addressed earlier, but it's probably worth mentioning. Are you expecting to have a COVID-19 SMQ ready for version 23.1?
Well, we do certainly recognize the urgency of this. We are working with the MEDRA Management Committee to see what would be the most appropriate way of getting a query out. Certainly in the interim, the search strategy that we've outlined there in the spreadsheet would be useful. I think certainly we have a good representation of relevant COVID-19 terms for you to use right now. But as I mentioned, we're continuing to receive change requests. So we would certainly want to consider additional terms to be added to an SMQ to provide the most comprehensive search. So if you have any ideas about what the scope of that SMQ should be, please put it in the chat so that we consider, and we will be having pretty urgent discussions, I think, with our regulatory and industry partners and the MEDRA Management Committee about getting an SMQ out in the shortest time possible.
There's one that might be useful just because we have the slides here. It says, please, can you show the location of the COVID-19 spreadsheet on the website? So obviously it's not there right now, but I can show you where it will be. So if you, in the upper right-hand corner here, you'll see the box that has a label that says MEDRA 23.0 update COVID-19 related terms and revisions. If you click on that blue text that is just below that, that will open up a spreadsheet. It's not there yet. It will be there Sunday, but that's exactly where it will be on the MEDRA. It's on the downloads page, so you'll need your MEDRA ID and password to get it. It will also be available on this dedicated COVID-19 page. And here you don't need your user ID and password to access it. So this will be amongst the items that will be posted on this page for you to be able to access it.
Okay, another technical question, Pat. Please could you confirm that the original 23.0 unzip passwords will apply to the new package?
No change there, but thank you for that question because we get it fairly frequently. So no change there. We thought there's enough moving parts not to change the unzip passwords. So you're the same one you open. The March release should work with this release. If you have a problem in any way, certainly contact the Msso help desk.
And a question here about the nomenclature that we're using. The specific question is, what is the rationale for naming the PT asymptomatic COVID-19 instead of asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infection? You'll see that at the LLT level, we've used a lot of synonyms. Strictly speaking, if you're talking about the virus that causes the disease, that's the SARS-CoV-2 virus. But however, people are using the terms very much interchangeably. We talk about COVID-19 testing when they're actually referring specifically to your testing for the virus, your testing for antibodies to the virus. But because people use these terms interchangeably, they also talk about the coronavirus. In this context, it's understood to be COVID-19. So you will see a lot of synonyms to help you with auto-encoding and the way that people use these terms pretty much interchangeably, the name of the virus and the name of the disease. Question, are there any new non-current LLTs since the earlier 23.0 release? And maybe, Pat, I think if you could go back to one of the slides, I think it's the hierarchy slide.
Oh, yeah.
That's a very, very good question. There are actually two, yes,
Yeah.
there we go. So under coronavirus test positive, you'll see that there are the old SARS virus test positive and the fully spelled out name. Now these are ambiguous. They've been around and since the time of the original SARS-1 outbreak. Because in the context now we've got SARS-1 and SARS-2, those could be confused. So we've made those two old SARS-1s non-current. And we have then created, is not shown on this slide, but we also have a new PT for SARS-CoV-1 test terms to make the distinction between the old SARS and the new SARS. So just two terms have been made non-current, just to avoid any potential confusion with the old SARS virus.
Now, the question that we received that we've gotten this a number of different times, at what time are you going to post the materials on the 19th of April? And at times people have been asking for a very precise time frame. So as Judy mentioned, we are working now to complete our last quality checks. This is a very unusual event for us, so we have to do additional things to make sure we don't introduce an error in the process of this unusual update. So we cannot guarantee a time right now when it will be available, but we will try to do it as early as we can. We realize the more time, the better, but we're reluctant to give a time because we may need the time to address any particular issues that come up. Keep in mind, we're updating not just to post it on the website, but to update the tools that go with it. So the web-based browser, the mobile browser, the desktop browser, all of these tools, MVAT, need to be updated and checked to make sure that everything is properly loaded and the right information is available.
A number of questions coming in here, Pat, that I can answer. We didn't show you the whole spreadsheet. Questions coming in regarding what types of other terms are there. New quarantine terms are included. Just a couple of those. We've got home isolation, I believe, was added, and quarantine and home quarantine. If there are any others that you want to consider adding, please feel free to submit those for 23.1, but we've got a couple of those quarantine concepts and isolation concepts already in this April release. Also, are there any COVID-19 carrier terms included in the April version? And yes, there is a term for SARS-CoV-2 carrier that's been added. Did we add a term for suspected COVID-19? Yes, we did. So suspected COVID-19 is there. Also the asymptomatic, as you'll see. Let's see if there are any others.
There was a preferred term, SARS-CoV-2 test false negative, but
Yes.
not a false positive. Is it not possible to get a false positive test for CoV-2?
I believe there is. It is a concept. We didn't quite get it in for this April release, but it is something that we could consider. The false negatives are more frequent and more relevant, but certainly false positive is a valid concept.
What SOC or I guess will the quarantine terms fall into?
They're in the surgical and medical procedures SOC. We have a large HLT there called Therapeutic Procedures NEC, and that's where terms like hospitalization, an existing term patient isolation is. So that's where they're found. Again, this spreadsheet will give you the full hierarchy. If we're able to scroll down in the spreadsheet, you'll see the quarantine terms, and you'll see that they're in the surgical and medical procedures SOC. Pat also mentioned a couple of exposure terms that we've added. Those are located in the exposures hierarchy, which is in the injury, poisoning, and procedural complications SOC. So we have exposure to SARS-CoV-2 and also occupational exposure to SARS-CoV-2. That's particularly relevant for healthcare professionals who are being exposed to the virus. Let's see.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any newer ones. There's a little bit of a repeat of what we've covered. Are there any terms on the psychiatric or psychological impact of COVID-19 quarantine, isolation, lockdown?
Not currently in this April release, but certainly worth considering again for the 23.1. You have until June the 1st to get in those change requests. So but certainly welcome any suggestions that you have for those. I think as we learn more about the virus, it's evident that it really is a multi-systemic disease. We know that it results in cytokine storm, so we have terms for that, but there may be some unique combinations. We already have a term now for COVID-19 pneumonia, but we're seeing things like coagulopathies, acute kidney injury related to COVID-19, a myocarditis type of scenario. So these are all potential considerations for new terms. Typically, we would split code, but this virus really is very different, and we might consider terms that combine concepts for ease of retrieval.
The display right now may be helpful with this next question. You mentioned other changes, not COVID-19 related. Can you speak further about it? I'm assuming a little bit about, you see the MERS terms that are there. So
yes. So these really just are spin-offs from adding the COVID-19 terms. I've already alluded to the fact that we had to make two terms non-current because of potential confusion. And here, in creating a new HLT for the coronavirus infections, because MERS and SARS are coronaviruses, we moved those to that new HLT. You will also see there in the change column, column H, that we moved those to the new HLT. So those were related changes. Also, I mentioned that for MERS and SARS, we didn't have a comprehensive set of investigation terms for those particular viruses. So again, to avoid confusion with coding for COVID-19 test results, we added specific PTs and LLTs for the old MERS and SARS infections as well. So they're all just really a consequence of adding these new COVID terms. We had to make sure there was no ambiguity with the existing coronavirus terms.
maybe in the interest of time, maybe we can just do one more, Judy. So do we have a preferred term, COVID-19 prophylaxis?
I believe we do. If not, I can't remember off the top of my head. I believe we do, though, in this April release.
Okay.
Yeah. So we
If
have
not,
prophylaxis, treatment, immunization. So these could be used, if you're conducting clinical trials, on a vaccine or treatment for COVID-19, those terms could be used to code the indication.
Great. Okay, I think with that, we're at the top of the hour, so we don't want to take up more than your time. I imagine we can go on answering questions for a while, but I very much appreciate your responsiveness and attending.